Dead Air Studios presents The Pain Chaser 1, Ambuscade, by Patrick E. Malloy, read for you by the author. This recording is released under a Creative Commons 4.0 license, so feel free to share it with your friends or enemies, but always give appropriate credit. This story is not intended for children and contains profanity, violence, and disturbing content that some people may find offensive. If you're in doubt, please turn back now, as you may find that some doors, once opened, refuse to be shut. Four. Tabitha Marsh pushed open the door to her daughter's high school and stood in the main hall. A feeling of déjà vu and awkward nostalgia flooded through her as she looked around. Things had not changed much since she'd come to the school as a child. She, however, was a completely different person. As a young girl, Tabitha had been awkward and chubby. The other children had teased her relentlessly. The school represented a part of her life that she would rather forget. As an adult, she'd reinvented herself in body and in mind. The new Tabby Marsh would take everything that the old Tabitha had deserved but never received. A breast augmentation surgery and 2 ex-husbands later, and a 16-year-old daughter was now solely her responsibility, and the girl was a terror. Tabby glanced at the wrestling and football trophies they had displayed behind glass in the hall. She placed her palms against the pane to get a better view. The names had changed, but she suspected it might be the same glass. 20 years' worth of dust and grease caked its cloudy surface. She removed her hands from the glass, willing herself not to think about the germs that could be breeding there, and wiped them on her denim hip huggers. She walked awkwardly into the labyrinthine hallways, the patterns of which came back to her as if from a dream she'd forgotten until that moment. The colors of the lockers and hallways painted a picture of the past so sharp that it was shocking, and caused her a moment of vertigo. The place even smelled the same, the stale odor of hundreds of children and disinfectant. Shaking off the feeling, she removed a hand-scrawled note from her jacket pocket listing a room number and the teacher's name. Mrs. Pearsall, room 194. She thought the name over. Had there been a Mrs. Pearsall in her day? She didn't think so. She headed off in the direction she believed the classroom was probably in. If she remembered correctly, the building was set up in a sort of lopsided pentagon, with the lower numbers on the left and the higher numbers on the right. Somewhere in the building she could hear a whip crack of a basketball hitting a gym floor again and again. And the repeated false starts of a brass band somewhere practiced a fanfare that had been overused even in her time. Only hours earlier, she'd come home from work to find a message waiting for her on her answering machine from Mrs. Pearsall, asking her to come in and talk about her daughter Vanessa's constant absences. Though the teacher's manner made it sound more like a demand than a request. She had no doubt she knew precisely where Vanessa had actually been. Up at the mall with her boyfriend David, or fucking in the back of his car somewhere. She came finally to the classroom. The lights were on, but no one was inside. Oh well, she tried. She was relieved that she wouldn't have to deal with the missing teacher, but as she turned, she found herself face to face with a short, stout woman with glasses and a nauseating pink sweater. The woman smiled pleasantly, artificially.
Mrs. Marsh?
She asked, extending her hand to shake.
Ms. Marsh,
Tabby said, taking the hand as if she were touching something unspeakable.
Well, Ms. Marsh,
Mrs. Pearsall said, putting the same emphasis on Ms. that Tabby had.
If you'd like to step into my classroom, we can get started.
All right,
Tabby said with an impatient sigh.
But this had better not take too long. I have an appointment I have to meet.
She, of course, had no such thing.
Oh, I won't take up too much of your precious time, Miss Marsh. I wouldn't want to inconvenience you with something as trivial as your daughter's education,
the teacher said contemptuously. They'd already gotten off to a bad start.
Listen,
Mrs. Pearsall said, sitting behind her desk and offering a smile as sweet as honey, still dripping from a nest of angry bees.
I'm not one of these teachers that's going to try to blame every situation on the parent, or the child for that matter. It's my belief that in most cases, if a child fails in the classroom, it's because the teacher has failed in some way. Children inherently don't want to learn, except for those few special cases that get off on proving themselves. They need to be enticed. I'm happy to say that I have a pretty good record with the children in my classes. Your daughter, however, doesn't show up for class. How can I reach out to a child that is never here?
Tabby shook her head.
Kids these days do anything they want.
Kids these days are no different than they were when you and I were children. The world has changed, I'll grant you that. But who am I supposed to blame when Vanessa doesn't show up for class?
I work,
Tabby said.
I can't be making sure that I know where she is every minute of the day.
Miss Marsh, you're a parent. That's exactly what you need to do. It's your responsibility as the girl's mother.
Where's Vanessa's father?
Mrs. Pearsall asked.
That's none of your business.
Tabby snapped. Then, stifling the anger, she added,
Besides, I haven't seen him in years.
What I mean is,
the teacher said, trying to apply some tact,
that I know it can be difficult for a single parent raising a child alone. It can be challenging without help.
Tabby nodded.
Well, that's what I'm here to offer,
the older woman said.
I really do care about these kids, and I want you to know that I can be here as a lifeline or support if need be. We may have started off on the wrong foot, but I'm here to help. I really am.
Tabby looked at her questioningly.
Now, if you'd like, I can help you put together a program.
She went on.
A set of exercises to help Vanessa get on the right path.
This woman had some nerve. Was she trying to imply that Tabby was a bad mother? That she was incapable of taking care of her own child? Sure, Vanessa was going through a rough spot, but every girl her age did.
Is there a time when we could get together to discuss this more thoroughly?
Tabby felt her suppressed guilt biting at her, lighting a fire under her anger.
How dare you?
She hissed through clenched teeth.
How dare you try to weasel your way into my personal business? As if I was incapable of taking care of my own child.
Mrs. Pearsall sighed.
Miss Marsh, I assure you that's not my intention. My concern is for Vanessa's...
But Tabby cut her off, unwilling to listen.
You've got 40 other kids in this classroom. Let me worry about my own daughter.
Then the teacher's own anger flared.
Well, it doesn't seem that you're doing a very good job of it at the moment.
You can't talk to me like that!
Tabby spit.
I can speak any way I like,
Mrs. Pearsall said matter-of-factly.
I've got tenure at this school, and I know more about educating children than one single working mother. Now, I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, Miss Marsh, but as I said, my concern is for Vanessa.
Vanessa, who you seem to be so worried about, is probably off fucking her 24-year-old boyfriend.
Tabby yelled, her inner thoughts turned candid by her rising anger. If the teacher was shocked, she didn't let it show on her face.
True as that may be, Vanessa is still a child in our care, and children cannot be held completely accountable for the mistakes that they make. Not entirely. It's our job as teachers and parents to make sure that they get on the right path.
I don't have to take this from you,
Tabby said, standing up.
Well, you'd better start taking it from someone.
The older woman yelled up at her.
This isn't your life we're talking about.
It damn well is my life,
Tabby said.
She's my daughter.
It stopped being your life the moment you decided to have a daughter.
It hadn't really been a choice at all, but Tabby bit that remark back. Instead, she said,
Fuck this,
and stormed from the classroom.
Where the hell do you think you're going?
The teacher called after her, but she'd already slammed the door. Tabby stood in the hallway with her back to the wall, chest heaving. Her face felt hot and flushed, and she could feel deep welts in the palms of her hands where her fingernails had dug in. She wanted to be angry, but the dominant emotion that flooded through her was not anger, it was guilt. She swallowed it down. She steadied her breathing and she tried to calm herself. The woman was a know-it-all bitch, she told herself. She didn't know what she was talking about. Vanessa was just going through a phase. She would grow out of it. Girls her age always rebelled, always fucked up a little. If she got herself in any real trouble or ended up pregnant, well, then she would have to deal with it, like Tabitha herself had had to. You can't hold a mother accountable for everything a girl did. Her guilt abated. After all, deep down, Vanessa was a good kid. She was just growing up, and fucking up was part of growing up, wasn't it? Tabby found herself outside of the school, but on the wrong side. She couldn't figure out how she got so turned around, but this obviously wasn't the parking lot where she parked her car. She tried to push the door back open, but she found that it had locked behind her.
Fuck,
she hissed. Oh well, it wasn't that cold out. She could probably use the exercise. She plunged her hands into her coat pockets and began walking around the side of the school. She passed the lengthy bus platform. It only contained 2 buses for kids doing after-school activities. She continued around towards the back parking lot. As she came around the back of the building, she noticed a man standing under the overhang. He hadn't seen her yet. He looked familiar. And he was handsome. He had a stocky frame, but with a semi-muscular build. He had a little extra weight around the middle, but she liked that. His grizzled brown hair fell just past his ears. He stood slightly hunched, back to the wind, hand cupping a cigarette as he tried to suck it down. He must be a teacher here. She hopped back around the corner before he could see her. She unzipped the front of her jacket and undid the first 2 buttons of her blouse to show a decent amount of cleavage. What was the point in getting $8,000 worth of plastic surgery if you weren't going to use it? She approached the man, throwing her chest out, and when he noticed her, he instinctively hid the hand holding the cigarette behind his back. When he realized she wasn't another teacher, he relaxed and gave her an embarrassed smile.
Smoking on school property?
Yeah, he laughed. I'd appreciate it if you didn't say anything about that. I just needed to get out and have one, and I don't like walking all the way back to the other side of the parking lot.
Don't worry. Your secret's safe with me.
He smiled. Don't I know you?
Yeah, I think we go to the same gym.
Right. Brian, he said, extending a hand.
Tabby,
She said, shaking it lightly. He had a strong grip. That was good. It showed confidence.
You mind if I bum one of those?
She asked him. She didn't usually smoke, but she found it was always good to meet men on their own terms. It always made them feel more comfortable when they thought you had something in common, even something as small as this. He handed her a cigarette and even lit it for her. What a gentleman.
Are you sure this is okay?
She asked, glancing around, pretending to look to see if anyone was watching her. She didn't really care, of course, but it was the camaraderie that was the turn-on. They were both teenagers again, sneaking out to have a cigarette. They were being bad. Men ate that sort of thing up. Yeah, I think it'll be okay, he said.
So what do you teach?
Oh, I'm a history teacher.
Really? Been at it long?
No, this is only my first year. She brushed her hair back behind her shoulder, smiling girlishly. She figured she had about 5 years on him, but she knew how to play the innocent role. Well, I know you're not on the staff, so I'm assuming you must be a parent, he said.
Yeah, single parent,
She said, emphasizing the single.
My daughter goes here. You have any kids?
Yeah, 2 boys, also a single parent. They're with their mother most of the time, but I get to see them on the weekends, and I take them to football and karate. More common ground, she thought. She watched his eyes skirt the freckles across the top curves of her breasts. They only lingered for a moment, not long enough to be a pervert, but long enough to show interest. Play your cards right, buddy, and you'll have your hands all over them later. Maybe she wasn't the best at getting her daughter to fall in line, but she sure knew how to get what she wanted out of a man. She bet all the high school girls had a crush on this one.
So are you the fun teacher?
She asked.
The hip young guy who all the kids identify with and make learning fun?
He snorted laughter. I'd like to think so. Or at least that I may not yet be tainted by the system. I hated history when I was in high school. It wasn't until college that I developed a passion for it. The way the textbooks teach it is too dry. It's all names and dates. There's no passion, no story.
So you try to bring a little bit of that passion to the classroom.
Yeah.
Passion's a good thing to have.
He smiled at her knowingly. Men were so easy. It didn't matter if they were high class, low class, rich, poor, doctors, or garbage men. They're all the same. Dogs chase their tails. Men chase any tail that wags long enough. Well, the fake tits didn't hurt either. The hard part wasn't getting a man to notice you. It was keeping him around once he got a piece. But if you weren't in the market for anything permanent, your path was paved in gold. Blessed is the life of the whore.
So how'd you get into teaching if you thought history was boring?
She asked him. Well, I think I picked up the bug while traveling. When I was in college, I started as an art major. I did a lot of studying abroad, saw most of Europe, Africa, South America, experiencing other cultures. I started developing a real interest in world history and anthropology. So I switched majors.
That's interesting,
She said.
I've hardly even left the States. I wish I could do more traveling.
I think everybody should, he said. It's the way the curriculum is set up here that makes it seem boring. Americans have such a geocentric point of view. The way they teach other cultures is biased. Textbooks cover the wars and the dates and kings and queens, but it never gets to the real heart of their culture, music, art.
What about the women?
She asked. Well, there's nothing wrong with American women, but I did meet my ex-wife in Barcelona. The boys were born here in the States, and nothing against American women, but to be honest, American culture is very shallow. I hope they take the boys to see the countries of their heritage someday.
Well, it's nice to see that at least some American men aren't shallow.
Though she knew she probably had about the depth of a blow-up kiddie pool. Brian smiled anyway. She pitched what was left of her cigarette. Time to put the bait out.
Well, I really gotta get going. But it was really nice to meet you, Brian.
You too. Hey, would you mind if I got your phone number? We could go out for drinks sometime? Hook, line, and sinker.
Isn't it unethical to date the parents of your students?
She asked with a wink. What's your daughter's name?
Vanessa Marsh.
No Vanessa Marsh in any of my classes, so she's not my student. Tabby laughed.
I would love to have a drink with you, Brian. Let me give you my number.
He flipped out his cell phone, and she told him to list her under Tabby, never Tabitha. She said goodbye to Brian and walked back to her car, zipping her jacket up as she went. Her daughter forgotten. Annie had been throwing up all morning. It may just have been the barbecue chicken from the night before, but it might just be something else. She hoped it was something else. Morning sickness, maybe. She wanted a baby so badly. She and Henry had tried multiple times in the past, but she'd never been able to conceive. Well, for the past 3 days, she'd woken up feeling nauseous, and this morning, sickness came. Actual morning sickness, or something else. She couldn't be sure. So she'd driven to the convenience store and purchased a pregnancy test. Pee on a stick, wait 3 minutes. Couldn't be easier. If you get a little blue plus, then you know you're in business. Get the blue minus, and well, it's back to calendars and thermometers. She remembered taking one of these back in high school, dreading that blue plus. Now, she wanted nothing more. She'd gone to the gynecologist, and he'd assured her that she wasn't barren, but they'd tried so many times and failed. She was afraid to approach the subject with Henry, that perhaps the problem was on his end. She'd gone over the potential conversation in her head many times.
It's okay. It doesn't make you any less of a man. We could always get a sperm donor. It would still be our child.
No matter how many times she went over that scenario, she didn't like the outcome. Telling a man that maybe his boys weren't swimming all the way upstream was like a direct attack on his pride. She opened the test and followed the instructions, being careful not to piss on her hand, and then set it aside for the prerequisite 3 minutes. Her cell phone rang. The name that came up on her display was Ken Shaker, her boss. What great timing. Well, as much as she didn't relish talking to him on her day off, it might make the 3 minutes go faster. She answered the phone with her sweetest,
Hello?
Annie?
Yeah?
Hi, it's Ken Shaker. Mr. Shaker.
What can I do for you?
Are you busy today? Around 2:30 this afternoon?
Not especially, why?
I'm calling a meeting about the Kettle Creek site, and I want you there. Given the recent chewing out Annie received over her screw-up with the courthouse paperwork, she was more than a little surprised by Ken's request.
Well, I had assumed that, because of the probation, that I wasn't going to be involved with that one.
Well, just come in, and we'll talk about it. It'll only take about half an hour at the most.
Okay,
she said, drawing the word out in bewilderment. Well, do you want the job, Annie? He asked.
Oh, yeah, of course I do. I was just surprised, that's all.
She struggled over her words. Good, he said. I was starting to think maybe you didn't feel up to it.
2:30?
She asked, trying to infuse her words with more confidence. 2:30, he said, and hung up. Annie couldn't help but think the entire call had been very strange. Once Shaker had made his mind up about something, he wasn't known for backtracking. Then again, he'd never really actually said he didn't want her to go one way or the other. That was just the word around the office. Annie put it out of her mind, deciding not to question her second chance. The conversation had to have killed at least 3 minutes. And now there was a much more pressing issue to attend to. She walked back to the bathroom and picked up the test with her eyes closed. Please, God. Please, God. Please, God. She opened her eyes and looked at the minute display. Negative. It was always negative. It was the barbecue chicken after all. Damn. Again, her thoughts went back to Henry. Maybe he was shooting blanks. How could she convince him to see a doctor? How could she even bring it up without hurting his feelings? Men were just so full of pride. Henry was a good man, but he was no different. Something like that would make him feel emasculated and responsible for her own sadness. Plus, if she did use a sperm donor, he might feel like it wasn't really his child. Maybe she could just bring up the topic of adoption. At least then the child would be neither of theirs biologically, so he wouldn't grow to resent her. It would put them back on equal footing. They'd never talked about adoption before. She'd spent a good deal of her own childhood in and out of various foster homes after her parents had died. It may actually be gratifying. There were, after all, a lot of children that needed homes. She sighed. She so badly wanted a child of her own, to feel it grow inside her, to experience that mystical connection that only mother and child are said to have. She flopped down on the couch and glanced at the clock. It was 11:30. That gave her more than 2 hours to get dressed and take a shower. She didn't really feel like going to the office on her day off, but if she could make this Kettle Creek thing work out for her, then she might be able to pull her ass out of the fire at work. And that was at least something. She decided to go all out. Her best clothes, do her makeup, and if there was time, even curl her hair. She wasn't going to fuck it up this time. The Chester Public Safety Office was no different from any other bureaucratic office. Nondescript, uncomfortable furniture and bland commercial carpeting accompanied the incessant clicking of analog clocks and the smell of burnt coffee and printer ink. The walls, that particular color of off-white paint that all office walls seemed to share. She'd arrived before anyone else, wearing her freshly pressed black silk shirt and skirt set that trailed down just below her knee. Her shoulder-length curls bounced around her shoulders. She felt pretty. She felt confident. Kind of. She pushed open the door to the conference room. It was dominated by a large circular table, the edges of which were rough and chipped. The pseudo-wood had seen better days, much like everything else in the office. Off to the side, and to the left of the door, was a smaller fold-out table with fresh coffee in a pump and an open box of donuts of questionable age. Mr. Shaker entered directly behind her, giving her a bit of a start. "Hey, Annie," he greeted her. "I hope you don't mind, but I asked everyone else to come a bit later because I wanted a chance to talk to you alone first." Her heart jumped into her throat.
Okay,
she managed. Shaker wasn't a big man, but he had a presence about him, something that demanded respect, or at least the guise of respect. He was middle-aged, losing his personal battle of the bulge. His hair and thin mustache had gone winter gray. "Coffee? Donuts?" he offered.
No, I'm all right.
"Okay, well, have a seat." He seated himself on the opposite side of the table. "I'm going to be honest with you, Annie, I was not going to send you on this one. The only reason I am is because of the foreman at Kettle Creek High, Chase Lawrence." She stiffened. There it was. It all made sense now. "He asked for you by name," Shaker continued, "and since you've been the one in contact with him on this since the beginning, I felt that it would look somewhat unprofessional for you not to be on the team. But I don't want you to feel uncomfortable either. Don't worry about the paperwork or calculations. I'll be leaving those in Steve and Tabby's more than capable hands. Think of this more as a relearning experience." She knew that this was his way of trying to be kind, but still, the man had a way of making you feel inadequate.
"So what is it you want me to do?"
she asked timidly, feeling her confidence slipping away. "Just observe, really. Watch what Steve and the others do, especially Steve. He's been with us a long time, and don't be afraid to ask questions."
"Others?"
she asked. "Yeah, I'm sending 4 other people with you on this. It's a big job, and I think we might get some bad snow this week, so I wanted to cover all my bases. Get everyone in and out as fast as possible."
"I thought we were only supposed to get flurries,"
she said. He actually smiled. "Yeah, that's what the official forecast says, but I don't listen to them. I listen to my wife. She says she can tell if it's going to rain or snow just by looking at the moon. Smelling the air, feeling her joints. Sounds crazy, but after 30 years of marriage, I've learned to trust her instincts. She's never been wrong." There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Mr. Shaker called. It was Steve. He'd lost the lumberjack outfit and shaved off the beard, but he still looked like a member of the living dead. His eyes were sunken in the grimace of a man obviously in the grips of a hangover. Shaker pretended not to notice. As long as Steve did decent work, he would continue not to notice. Steve made a beeline for the refreshment table and poured himself a cup of black coffee before sitting down. "Morning, boss. Afternoon." "Afternoon, Steve," Shaker said. "You know Annie." "Yeah," Steve answered the statement as if it had been a question. "Hi, Annie," he croaked. We're just waiting for a few more people, Mr. Shaker said. Steve coughed in a cupped hand and then threw back a large gulp of black coffee. A couple silent moments later, the door opened again. This time, Anton and Rob entered, talking and laughing loudly about an Asian girl that Rob had slept with. Tabby walked in directly behind them, spotting Annie immediately and mouthing something that looked like the word dick before motioning with her eyes at Rob's back. Rob and Anton went for the donuts, grabbing a handful apiece and sitting together opposite Annie, while Tabby poured herself a cup of coffee, adding copious amounts of cream and sugar, and finally coming to seat herself next to Annie without so much as a word. The others exchanged pleasantries, and then Mr. Shaker cleared his throat. Now, I'm sure you all know this coming week we're going to be doing the final inspection of the rebuilt Kettle Creek High School. If there was doubt, you 5 are the ones I'm sending. No one seemed surprised, though Anton did cast a curious glance at Annie. She felt herself shrinking into her chair.
Do you really need 5 people to go?
Tabby complained, scowling. Yes, I do. I want to get this thing done quickly as possible, and having 5 people on the job will give me peace of mind. We're already going to be going in late. The workers aren't going to be off-site until well into the afternoon. There was a chorus of groans. Hey, don't complain to me, Mr. Shaker said. I don't write their schedules. If you want to bitch at someone, take it up with the construction crew. They knew we had this inspection penciled in for Thursday. They're really cutting it close. It's going to be really nasty out Thursday night as it is, and it's a liability to the company to have you on site so late. Does anyone know exactly how to get to this place? Rob asked. I do, Steve said, and my SUV's got a GPS. You can all ride with me to make it easier to save on gas. Plus, it handles better in the snow than that POS Mustang you drive, Rob. Rob stuck out his tongue. Well, the state wants us to be particularly careful with this inspection, Mr. Shaker continued. You all know the original school was actually destroyed by a fire in the first place back in the 60s. 67, Anton offered. Well, the new structure is almost identical to the old one, as it's built directly on the foundation of the original. No one is exactly sure what started that fire. At that, Rob fake coughed something that sounded like Columbine. Shaker ignored him. We need to be very thorough. That means no cutting corners. I want it done fast, but I want it done right. Mr. Shaker placed a portfolio on the table and slid it toward Steve. These are the schematics for the alarm system as it was submitted to us. His eyes flicked toward Annie. Please make sure that system matches the paperwork verbatim. And before anyone asks, Kettle Creek doesn't have their own fire department, so the emergency numbers their central station are to be given are the one for the department here in Chester.
Why doesn't Kettle Creek have a fire department?
Annie asked Tabby in a whisper.
Small towns like Kettle Creek sometimes don't,
Tabby told her. They're lucky they have a police department, Mr. Shaker added in response to their conversation. I'd be surprised if they had an overall population of 150. The high school was designed when there were a lot more people in town, and the redesign is meant to encourage growth. He turned to Steve. I want you and Annie to check the gas connections in the science, kitchen, and home ec rooms. There may be a gas stove in the teacher's lounge as well, I'm not sure. Then make the calls to the central station and verify their emergency contact numbers. You can do all the system checks together. Robert, you're on electrical. You know the drill. That's all I want you to do while you're there. I don't want to hear that you were fucking around with Anton because you rushed through your work. Rob was the obvious choice for this job because he worked previously as an electrician. He would know shoddy work if he saw it. Anton, I want you to check the heating and air. Anton smiled at this, probably because it would give him an excuse to go into the basement. And Tabby, you back them up with whatever they need and organize the paperwork.
Oh, come on,
she said. Don't oh come on me. Steve's got his hands full with the system analysis. He's just going to be feeding you information anyway. I was just asking you to put it in the right place so that it can be filed correctly. It's not rocket science.
It just seems like something that could be done back at the office, that's all,
she said.
I don't know why you even need me backing them up.
Mr. Shaker looked as though he was losing patience with her, and Rob was stifling a laugh a little too obviously. Because I want every single bit of the job done before Friday morning. It's been in the pipeline way too long as it is. You know there are numerous smaller jobs involved that need to get done. I'm expecting you to pick up the slack. If I didn't think we needed 5 people on the job, I wouldn't be sending 5. It's not like I like paying people for doing nothing.
4, technically,
Tabby said.
Annie's just tagging along.
If it was possible, Annie sunk even further into her chair. Ms. Marsh, Mr. Shaker practically yelled. That's enough. That's the way it is. I'm in charge and I don't care if you're not happy with it. Am I making myself clear?
Fine,
she said, folding her arms defiantly. Annie felt minuscule, like a child among adults. Well, maybe except for Tabby. She wanted to come forward, to make herself known, but she had no words, and her throat felt tight and dry. She wished she was home with Henry. Suddenly, the expensive clothes and makeup made her feel foolish. The meeting deteriorated into idle conversation, mostly carried by Steve on the intricacies of the Kettle Creek alarm systems. He voiced his opinion that he felt that particular system that they'd chosen was cheap and not worth its weight in scrap metal. The conversation turned to various companies and models. It seemed everyone was more knowledgeable on that subject than Annie. Even the prima donna Tabby had her 2 cents to put in. She felt her mind wandering, and time passed painfully slow. Annie watched, all too conscious of her silence. Half an hour passed, an hour 15. Finally, Annie cleared her throat. Mr. Shaker looked at her as if just noticing she was in the room. "Oh, Annie," he apologized. "I'm sorry, I already kept you longer than I said I would."
If you need me, I can stay longer.
She was already damning herself for her martyr tendencies. No, that's fine," he said. "You can go home. It's your day off." She nodded and got up from the table. "Just be here bright and early on Thursday," he said. "There's an excellent chance that you won't be leaving until well into the afternoon, but we may get lucky." She nodded again and disappeared out the door. Outside, the bright sunlight seemed to revitalize her. She felt as if she could breathe for the first time since she'd arrived. She wondered how she would get through this when it seemed like the hardest thing to do was merely speak in front of other people. She felt paralyzed by fear of making a fool of herself. Why did she even care what these people thought? She suddenly regretted quitting smoking 6 years ago. She could really use a cigarette. Well, it was already 3:30 and school would be out, which meant at least Henry would be home when she got there. She realized with a pang of guilt that she neglected to leave him a note explaining where she'd be. He knew she was supposed to have the day off and would be worried. As if summoned by thought, her cell phone rang.
Hey, baby.
"Hey, where are you?"
Oh, I got called into a meeting at work. I'm coming home to you now.
His voice felt like a raft in a vast ocean. Meanwhile, back in the office, as they often do, conversation turned to the girl who was no longer present.
I don't even understand why she's coming with us.
"Because Chase has a crush on her," Anton laughed. "Because she needs to practice," Steve grumbled.
Just how much practice does any one person need?
Tabby asked. "I seem to remember you needing an awful lot of second chances yourself, Tabitha," Mr. Shaker said. "Besides, it's not your concern, it's mine. If I were you, I'd be more concerned about my own job. Speaking of which, where's the paperwork for the Hoffman's Bakery that you promised you'd have on my desk this morning?"
It's in my car, she said, annoyed. Would you like me to go get it now?
Yeah, that'd be nice, he said. She huffed and got up from her seat. "Personally, I like her. She's a nice girl," Rob said, talking about Annie.
You like anything with tits?
Tabby said, walking out of the room. Rob turned towards the others. "Well, she's not wrong." Half of the table erupted into boyish laughter. "She's just pissed off because hers came with a price tag," Anton said. "Hey," Rob said with a shrug. "Flesh or plastic, doesn't matter. If I can touch them, they're real to me." "Okay, guys, that's enough," Steve said. "Yeah, if we could get back to work here," Mr. Shaker agreed. "If Tabby heard you talking that way, she could bring you both up on sexual harassment charges." "Sorry," Rob said, chuckling. "I thought we were pretty much done. Just a few more small things," Mr. Shaker said. "Should we bring proton packs with us so we can catch us a ghost?" Mr. Shaker frowned at him. "I was wondering when this was going to come up. Seriously, I don't want to hear one word about Kettle Creek being haunted. It's total and utter BS. I don't want you guys scaring the girls." "Well, what really did happen in Kettle Creek?" Rob asked, stiffening. Mr. Shaker shrugged. "A freak fire. School burned down. A bunch of people got killed. End of story. I don't know what to tell you, Rob. Sad shit happens in this world. It's a fucked up place, but that doesn't mean it's haunted. Maybe we should bring a Ouija board just to be safe," Anton laughed. Rob forced himself to laugh along with him, but he hoped to God he wasn't serious. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you like what you've heard so far, please consider supporting my Patreon. I try to do this for free, but I do have to support myself somehow. Also, physical copies of my books are available